So, Dr. Elst, on behalf of India Facts, I would like to extend a very warm welcome. And we are both honored and privileged to have you here. So, before we begin, a few simple rules. By default, I've muted everybody on this session.
Yes.
So, Dr. Elst will commence his discourse on the steps to on how to preserve Sanatana Dharma for about 20 minutes to half an hour. Uh, I would request everyone to listen to him. Once his discourse is complete, I will throw the floor open to all the participants here, and they can engage with him by asking questions. Dr. Elst,
Yes.
welcome again. It's all yours now.
Okay. I hope everybody can hear me.
Can everybody hear Dr. Elst?
No protest. Okay. And of course, let's agree that this is a first attempt, so we still have to look a little bit how this works.
Go ahead.
Right. So, how to defend or preserve Hinduism? That question presupposes that Hinduism is under threat. Now, some people say, oh, it's so big, there are so many people involved that it's ridiculous to pretend it could ever be under threat. However, there are some objective factors that work strongly against it. It hardly needs any arguing that both Islam and Christianity seek to broaden their domain at the expense of Hinduism, that conversions are going on. In the case of Bangladesh or Pakistan, it is under pressure. Life is a lot easier if you are a Muslim than if you are a Hindu. Christians really go out and try to convince people. And against that, also Hindus have very little defense because they do not have a clear message, a clear and simple ideology or doctrine that is easy to gather people around. Whereas Christians come in and have a very clear message, which you may find ridiculous or not true, but anyway, for some people it is convincing in certain circumstances. For example, if you are sick, you are taken to a hospital and you are given a choice of not paying the hospital bill in return for converting, well, you might be tempted, and then you can get lessons, indoctrinations. In the literal sense of the word, indoctrination means learning to see the world through the Christian doctrine. And gradually you will get to interiorize some of it. And of course, not all of it, but the missionaries know this. But if you send your children to a Christian school, then they will lap up more of it. And so in a few generations, they will have forgotten that they were ever Hindus. In the case of conversions to Islam, it works similarly. See, of course, you can't change people's minds like that. So there's a lot of Hinduism in them that is going to remain, but in 1 or 2 generations, this is forgotten. Against that, Hindus have very little to offer. You see, in the West, there are some cases of people who wax enthusiastic about Hinduism, usually also not knowing much about it. You see, they meet one of these gurus and they get enthusiastic, and then they declare, you see, I've become a Hindu. But as soon as better informed people start working on them and giving them their usually biased, hostile view of what Hinduism is, these people will start to doubt. Also, they do not identify with Hinduism as a whole. They identify with this particular guru that they've met, and otherwise they don't care and they don't know much either. And so, also, this is in the West. You see, in India, you see very little of it. So, on the whole, Hinduism is beating a retreat. Another problem for Hinduism is Hindus themselves, because they themselves know very little about Hinduism and less, because in the past, Hinduism was just there. You drank it in even without going to school, even without learning about it. Now more and more, this formal education becomes important, and the atmosphere becomes less and less Hindu. Hindus themselves are taking more and more to Western consumerism, are more and more taking to a Western language, English, to Western dress, and so on. So Hinduism is less and less in the air, and you see that that is based on just tradition, on just being there, on being natural. This puts it at a great disadvantage vis-a-vis a religion that has a very clear ideological core. So more and more you have to contend with this ideological challenge. Therefore, one thing I'm working on is precisely to see what backbone there is in Hinduism. So that's my main philosophical work right now. The polemic with Christianity and Islam is not so much my concern anymore, in the sense that it is really quite simple. You see, as for Islam, you can easily make a diagnosis of the Prophet, which Islam completely depends on. Islam is nothing but following the precedent, the example of the Prophet. So you can see what his life was about, what his thinking was about, and it's fairly easy to refute. In the case of Christianity, I myself am an apostate of Christianity, which is nothing special because in my country, practically my whole generation walked out of the church. When I was a child, the great majority in the Flemish part of Belgium was Catholic and practicing Catholic. And by now, they are only a small minority. And you see, most people in that case, like myself, are not going to come back. You see, the knowledge that pinpricks Christianity is too strong. So they are very rare, people who convert back to Christianity on their deathbed or something. There's just no option. Many of these people never return to any sort of religion. Others become seekers, so to speak, experiment with things. And yes, some of them then find Hindu gurus or deeper Hindu philosophy. So that happens. And you see, I'm part of that movement to some extent. At any rate, both the cases of Islam and of Christianity are fairly clear. You see, they claim to be the true religion, and they are not true. Hinduism does not claim to be the true religion, but it has quite a great measure of truth in it. It, of course, also has some backward or funny social practices, and as far as I'm concerned, these should be gradually phased out, though, of course, it is up to Hindus to decide that and do that. Lately, I've been very focused on the mistake that Hindus themselves make. Because you see, there are very many Hindus who focus on the mistakes the others make and who like to publicize atrocities by Muslims and subversive types of conversion by Christian missionaries and so on. And that's all very nice, but very easy to do. Finding fault with others is just so easy. When in fact, the situation would be a lot better for Hinduism if Hindus themselves had got their act together. And so, you see, in this respect, for example, last week I was at a conference of the European Association of South Asian Studies. And it was very well organized, very professional. It was not too anti-Hindu because the conference was mainly organized 1 or 2 years ago when Hindu nationalism was at a low ebb. And there was no talk yet of Modi leading the party and of him sweeping the elections. So at that time, Hinduism was at a low ebb, and therefore the anti-Hindu animosity was also at a low ebb. So there was not too much of that. However, what I also noticed is that quite a few people were there bringing some sort of anti-Hindu message, fomenting all kinds of divisions within Hindu society on caste basis, women and so on. And there was nobody there defending Hinduism, standing up for Hinduism. And I wouldn't even know who could take the job. I mean, what Hindu scholars could have come there? I mean, I can name one or two from India, but you see, on the whole, Hindus are very, very weakly represented in a world where quite a bit of the future of Hinduism is being decided. Because you see, these scholars, strictly speaking, are only studying what they see, are only observing Hinduism, are not really doing anything. But in fact, they are creating the prism through which insiders as well as outsiders get to see Hinduism. So in the long run, they're quite important. Now, Hindus there are not represented at all, is perhaps too much to say, but practically not at all. Similarly, in India, in the history departments especially, we all know that about 10 years ago, Hindus were badly defeated in the textbook reform initiated by Human Resources Minister Murli Manohar Joshi. So you see, they got together a group of Hindu scholars who were going to rewrite the history textbooks. Now, they mostly proved their incompetence in the matter. And the opposing side had a good time laughing at Hindus and laughing at their incompetence. At that time, conferences like the one I attended last week typically had a session about history rewriting. And the tone of those sessions was briefly like this: Hindu nationalists are unspeakably evil, but fortunately, they are also abysmally stupid. I mean, I summarize the general opinion among scholars. So who were vaguely anti-Hindu, often not too much, you know, they were only walking along, but that was the dominant opinion. And so Hindus themselves have nurtured that impression by indeed either being incompetent or at any rate selecting incompetent people to do the job. You see, this is often something you see. Hindus have the right people, but somehow these people do not come to the fore. Like, for example, in the RSS magazine Organizer, the editor, not to speak of the other contributors, often publish articles full of bad English. You see, like, for instance, the article "the" is routinely used where it should not be used and not used where it should be used. And so for anybody who reads that, it looks stunted. It looks like some learner, you know, who doesn't master the language is trying his hand at it. Now, I have nothing against this. In fact, I don't think English should have a place in India in the first place. But you see, now that it's there, at least you should make sure to have good communication, and therefore, certainly on an editor's seat, you should have somebody who knows proper English. I mean, that's obvious. The secularists have no problem with it. You see, of course, some people are in the secularist camp who don't know good English either. But the ones who publish, or the ones who proofread what is being published, they at least do know English. Hindus somehow are too smug or too pretentious or something. I don't know what their problem is, but at any rate, they don't care to select the right people in the right place. And you see, this, I think, is part of a larger psychological problem. Hindus have not made up their mind that they want to achieve victory. They just vent their emotions. You see, they find certain developments unpleasant, so they complain and they wail. But they have just not decided, you see, we have to do this right, we want to get somewhere, and we're going to do all that it takes to get there. So that is That's a really existing problem that should be addressed. So sorry if I now focus on what Hindus should do right rather than on what the enemy is doing wrong. Maybe that already constitutes a good topic to discuss. So I propose that from here on we do it in an interactive fashion.
Fair enough. So, those who want to ask the first question, please unmute yourself and then address it to Dr. Elst. You need to unmute your audio first and then address your question to Dr. Elst.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm Sujata Srinath.
We can't see you on the webcam, Sujata. Have you just joined it online? I mean, just the audio conference?
I think so. Maybe I have done that only. I'm not sure.
That's okay. Your voice is coming. That's okay. Your voice is coming across. Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to know from Dr. Elst, why is it that the Christian and the Islamic religion, what is it that they have against the Hinduism? I mean, we don't really bother about the other religions. Why are they so after the Hindu religion and the people who follow Hinduism? What do you think is the reason that there is this I mean, they try to denigrate it? Why? Do you have any insight on that, so that, you know, then maybe we can think of dealing with it? I don't know about smugness and everything, but I have this existential question. Why are they after us when we are not after them?
The reason is, and you might be surprised to hear this, but the reason is that they love you. Yes, because you see, they, in their own mind at least, they possess the truth. They possess the key to heaven, to salvation, to eternal life. Now, if they really hated you, if they had contempt for you, if they wanted the worst for you, they would withhold their message from you. But now that they love you, they also want you to be saved and to live eternally, and therefore they want you to convert. Because of course, if you stay in your present benighted state as a pagan, then you are lost. Then you go to hell. But essentially, that's why. That is what they would say.
Is that the only reason, do you think, that they want to convert everybody and save the souls? Or is it some, I mean...
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Yes, you see, they want to save your soul, and therefore they want to convert you. They need to convert you.
And how does it benefit them? I mean, really?
How it benefits them? Well, they feel good about themselves by saving more people. You see, ultimately, they don't care about themselves because they are saved anyway. So it doesn't matter what they do to you. But you see, because they're generous, they want to extend that salvation to people like you. At least that's what they think. You see, they believe that they have the truth and they want to share it. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that what they believe is not the truth.
Yeah, okay, right. And what about the atheists? Why are the atheists after the Hindus?
Yeah, well, because you see, Hinduism has a bad reputation worldwide, which is partly precisely what is created by these scholars. You know, scholarship is less important perhaps than what I as a scholar tend to think, but still it is somewhat important. And it creates a certain image for Hinduism, which at the moment is very negative. We see there are Hindu websites quoting Western scholars, like Schopenhauer and Thoreau and so on, praising
Yes.
Hinduism. That's true, but that is 100 years ago or more. So
Yes.
today, very few people will do that. They will speak very negatively about Hinduism. Hinduism for them is caste, holy caste, and
Right.
nothing but caste. And
Yeah.
caste is to them an extreme form of inequality. And so you see, at the moment when Christianity has abolished slavery already 150 years ago, completely abolished slavery, even Islam under duress has abolished slavery, but the caste system still exists, even though it's illegal, but to some extent it still exists. And therefore, you see, Hinduism is so strong, has such a hold over its people, that it manages to force them to observe caste, or that's at least what outsiders perceive. And
Right.
therefore, Hinduism must be a very, very hard-headed enemy, and you see, very evil because very unequal. So that's why atheists tend to dislike Hinduism.
Okay. The
Thank you.
next participant, please.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. This is Ashwin. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
No, I've see. Generally, Indian history writing has piqued my interest. I've read a lot, like from Basham. I've read Elst's works. See, what I find is, like what Elst pointed out, is that left-leaning history writers appear far more competent in their presentation and this thing. I just want to know suggested reading list he's got, any authors who he feels will offer an alternate view. I don't know. Other than obviously Sitaram Goel and himself, etc. Other good established books, works which will offer a more sympathetic view of a nationalist history writing, maybe R.C. Majumdar, but someone else, so that we can well deeper into this thing.
Yes. Okay, well, the old school, people like P.V. Kane, Jadunath Sarkar, R.C. Majumdar are, of course, very much worth reading. The more recent school is still worth reading, but you have to keep in mind that they have an anti-Hindu bias, that they have an anti-Hindu agenda. Also, more recently, that anti-Hindu viewpoint has differentiated a lot. You see, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it used to be strongly Marxist. Now you see Marxism is even in India dying. Though it's still there, and the last Marxist undoubtedly will be an Indian. But you see, there are other schools like the subalterns. There's an inflow of, you see, Western egalitarian ideologies like feminism. So the anti-Hindu aspect of their ideology also is of several different kinds, is often not as strong, as fierce as in the case of Marxism. But so, yes, you see, predominantly there is an anti-Hindu bias in recent and present historiography. And indeed, you see, it wouldn't be necessary for me to busy myself with this if there was a solid Hindu school countering this trend. However, while there is no such school, at least there are some individuals that produce important work. So the picture is not all bleak, but those people deserve a lot more attention. Like there is a very good book that came out last year, Rama and Ayodhya, by Dr. Meenakshi Jain.
Yeah.
It's a very good account of the Ayodhya controversy. And it ends by detailing the impotence of the secularists in making their case. You see, when they were questioned in court by the Allahabad High Court, they completely fell through. They had to admit that they didn't know the stuff well enough. The archaeologists had to admit that they hadn't even visited the site, the excavations, and things like that. So, see, in earlier stages of the Ayodhya debate, already insiders knew that the secularists were performing very poorly. But now you see it has become official. Even before the court, the Hindu case has prevailed, and now it is all present in a scholarly book for all to read. You see, and it can really put an end to the secularist case on Ayodhya. So you see, that is a rare example, a very rare, too rare example of good history work. So let's start by reading those and proceed from there.
Any other participant wants to ask Dr. Elst?
Yes, my name is
Sandeep,
Rahul. Okay, Sandeep can ask after. I'll ask after that.
No,
yes,
go
Sandeep,
ahead.
go on.
Not me. Go ahead.
Okay, Sandeep Shiva here.
Yes, Shiva.
Good evening, Dr. Elst. I have this thought around what you said about we sending the wrong people to the forefront, to the front lines of the battle, and I really agree with you on that front. It's almost like we seem to be taking a knife to a gunfight here. And while I've been privileged to know some of the best traditional scholars, I don't think most of them are up to the task of facing the onslaught from the West on this. So how do we create a breed of warriors who understand tradition as it is meant to be, and also have the the wherewithal, the strength, the capacity to carry that out to the front? Because we seem to be completely disconnected on that. The battle requires a particular set of skills, knowledge. We have one at the back end, but we don't know how to translate it out at the front. So what do you think we could be doing on that front?
Well, the most important thing is to start doing it and learning the ropes just by practice. You just have to go out in the real world. If you stop shielding yourself and meet the enemy even on his own turf, and you know that initially you're going to perform poorly, but you have to take that test of reality, and then gradually you will learn. So that is very important. You see, that is what I don't see Hindus do enough. Of course, Western academic institutions like the American Academy of Religion or the European Association of South Asian Studies often are hostile terrain to Hindus, and Hindus find it really, you see, outspoken pro-Hindus find it very hard to even get invited there, to get nominated there, and so on. That is also true. So Hindus are kept out. Often Hindus have no specific political profile, can get in, and later on when they have tenure and so on, then you see something more outspoken comes out of them. But it is difficult. I admit that it is difficult, but we have to try. Everybody where he himself is, we have to try as best we can to get in there and get real life experience. Organizationally, Hindus talk a lot about, we should create a think tank. Well, I'm not so sure about that. You see, there are think tanks, but they are of the kind that only produce the conclusions that have been ordered, I mean, they don't do any real thinking. They only, clothe the preconceived conclusions in the necessary jargon, but you see, real thinking is quite rare. So I'm all for a good think tank, a sort of strategic center that judges things, that are being done or that are being published in terms of what do they mean for Hinduism. So I'm all for that, but at the same time, I don't expect too much of it. At any rate, we should not wait for that. We should just start.
Okay, the other gentleman had a question earlier.
Yes, so Doctor, Elst, what would you suggest for individuals who are doing 9 to 5 jobs and stuff like that, but who have time on weekends and in the evenings? What can they do? What can they start doing so that we can protect and also Sanatana Dharma and also influence other people?
Well, maybe this is not really an answer to what you want, since you speak of going out and doing things. You see, I'm all for that, but the first thing to do is to get your own view of things right. You see, very many Hindus are plagued with a tendency to go out and say things and do things, but haven't really thought about it, haven't informed themselves. Like, for example, I hear quite a few so-called internet Hindus who are all worked up about, some recent riot in which Muslims have killed Hindus. And they say, oh, we should teach Muslims a lesson. We should all go out and get violent. And, well, I don't know if that's the right solution. Maybe, there may be situations when violence is the only option. But before it comes to that, there is still a whole lot you can do. But you see, only if you have a correct view of things. In this case, what is wrong with Hindus is that very many of them think about Hindus versus Muslims in racial terms. They think that Hindus just are Hindus and Muslims simply are Muslims and they can't help it. And they will remain Muslim for all time. Now, in reality, all Hindus have ancestors who were, Hindus themselves were Hindus. Even though the word at some point came into existence, before that it wasn't there. But at least you see, their tradition is continuous since more or less the beginning of mankind. Whereas the case of Islam or of Christianity, they have a clear memory of conversion, either in their own life or of their ancestors. So you have to understand that there is nothing intrinsically different between Hindus and non-Hindus. You see, they are all born the same way, and it's only later on that they are conditioned to become Muslim or to become Christian. So you have to understand this correctly, because this means that you do not have to treat Muslims like some dangerous animal species, with no other solution than keeping them at a distance or somehow overpowering them. No, you see, they have been converted at some point, and the solution for the future is also their conversion, or at least they're coming to their senses. You see, you don't have to convert people to anything specific, but at least you might inform them about the mistake that they believe in. You see, why have so many people in my country walked out of the church? Because knowledge has been democratized. You see, more and more people who in the past used to be superstitious and believers, came to have the knowledge that was incompatible with Christian belief, and therefore outgrew Christian belief. And then what they become later, well, you see, they have to see for themselves. But at any rate, they are no longer prisoners of this particular belief system. Similarly with Islam, and this may be even more difficult, but in the long run, it is what is going to happen. In fact, even today, there are ex-Muslims, and then life is very difficult for them, and they have to be very discreet, and on the internet they use pseudonyms and so on, but they exist. See, and it starts with very few people, but it will become more and more and more. And in fact, that is the only thing you can count on. You see, Hindus who say we have to be strong and we have to show, and for instance, in demography, we have to have more children because or Muslims have to have fewer children. We have to force them to have only 2 children or whatever. All this doesn't work. All this is not going to work. You'd have to set up a dictatorship and be really tough and so on. And then also very difficult for India, you'd have to actually execute the laws that you pass. You have to make them work rather than leaving them just on the statute books. So this is not going to happen. You see, if you don't come to your senses, if you don't inform yourself about the real history of how the Muslim community came about and draw your proper conclusions, then you're going to misbehave and you're not going to have success. You see, if you let demography just take its course, well, in about 2 generations, India will be a Muslim majority country. And there is nothing you can do about it, except help Muslims to outgrow Islam. Because you see, by demographic measures, it is not going to happen. You see, more and more Muslims are entering India from Bangladesh, even from Pakistan. Internally, they are growing and growing and growing. So you can't stop this, and convince Hindus to have more children is not going to work. Also, India is already pretty full. It's probably not desirable either. Then you see Muslims don't have that typically Hindu respect for celibacy. So you see so to speak, their wombs are all used for what they were made for. So you see they are demographically at a strong advantage, and they're definitely going to conquer India unless you spread knowledge. It is the only thing that is going to work. So you have to be clear in your own heads first of all about that. Like for instance, what is wrong with Islam or with Christianity, you may have to tell them, but you see it's not in the Hindu nature to go out and tell people, oh, what you believe is wrong. It's far more in the Hindu nature to live and let live. You see, as long as they don't trouble you, well, it doesn't matter what they do. That is far more congenial to Hindus. But at any rate, before you go out and tell anyone else, it's very important that you are clear in your own mind. So if you speak out against Islam, you're not going to get the votes of the Muslims, but you're not going to get those anyway. But you're not going to get the votes of the Hindus. That's mostly what's going to happen. Because Hindus don't like this, don't like clarity, you see, like to live in the illusions that everything is okay. So there, you're first going to have to educate the Hindus about this. So yes, you see, of course we have to do things, but first of all we have to inform ourselves. Because what is missing at this moment is clarity in the Hindu mind. There's so much confusion. You see, even political leaders that you look up to, turn out to suffer from this confusion.
All right, so there seem to be quite a few questions. Who wants to go next?
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Good evening from my side, Dr. Elst. I'm Pulasta here. One unfortunate thing that we notice is like faith groups like Buddhists and Sikhs who are closer to Hindus have somehow won over by the anti-Hindu side. So they attend all these anti-Hindu conference and give statements which are anti-Hindu. So is there a way we can, create a dialogue with them and, tell them that what they're joining the wrong side, to put it in a different manner? And next question would be, you spoke of conversions. Now there are Hindu groups like Arya Samaj or ISKCON who go on converting people to their version of Hinduism. But in the long run, what they do is to use the term Abrahamicize Hinduism, because they say you either have to believe in the Vedas or sanctity of the Gita to be a Hindu, which is, as you would say, not in a Hindu nature. So how do you, two different questions. So how do you tackle these two problems?
Yes. Okay, very good questions. As for Sikhs and Buddhists, let us again, first of all, be very clear in our own minds. Historically speaking, there is no such thing as a separate Sikh religion. You see, Sikhism, or Sikhi, as Sikhs themselves call it, is only one sampradaya of Hinduism. And you see, all the concepts in the Guru Granth Sahib are all Vedic or Hindu. Especially part of the, at that point, important bhakti movements linked with Kabir, with Ravidas, and so on. So there is no clear cleavage between Sikhism and the rest. As for Buddhism, it's a little bit more complicated because Buddhism was discovered by Western Orientalists in China and Japan. And it took some time even before they realized that the Buddha, this character that everybody was talking about and making statues of, that he was actually Indian. So Buddhism as a separate religion already existed in the minds of scholars even before it was reintroduced in India, or even before they knew that it came from India. And so you see that the separate developments that Buddhism has undergone outside of India, not linked to any developments in India, you could do justice to that by calling Buddhism a separate religion. On the other hand, historically speaking, the Buddha was 100% a Hindu. And you can only understand the genesis of Buddhism within the Hindu context. The Buddha himself entirely is part of Hindu developments. Like, for instance, he had two meditation teachers who were, of course, not Buddhist by definition. It is he himself who started Buddhism. He referred to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And of course, you see, the so-called Buddhist doctrine of non-self only makes sense when you first have a doctrine of the self, which is the central message of the Upanishad. The Buddha also praised the Vedic seers, Vasishtha, Vishwamitra, Kashyapa, and so on, because he thought, and he said so explicitly, that, you see, the Vedas were all right. Unfortunately, the Brahmins of his day had, misinterpreted or misunderstood the Vedas. But so, in a sense, Buddhism is a return to the Vedas as he understood them at the time. You see, within Christianity, I know a lot of people like that who say, you see, oh, this Christianity nowadays, you see, that we all know, that is, of course, ridiculous. But the Christianity of Jesus, that was deep and profound and nice and so on. Now, whether their idea of Jesus is correct or not, at any rate, they also make that distinction between really existing Christianity and some better idea of Christianity. So similarly, in the Buddha, we find this idea that, you see, the Vedic tradition of his day had deviated from what the Vedic tradition really must have been. But you see, the fact, for example, that he called his own doctrine Arya, noble, that already constitutes a return to the Vedas. You see, Aryan in India really means Vedic. Who are Aryans? You see, Aryans are identified with the upper castes. Why? Because they have the Vedic initiation. They are the continuators of the Vedic tradition. So Arya really means Vedic, and therefore it means part of the Vedic tradition, civilized, partaking of civilization, and hence noble. So that general moral sense of noble came later. Originally, Arya means Vedic. And so the Buddha was perfectly aware of this. And so he saw himself as in continuation of the Vedic seers. So you have to be clear about this. Historically speaking, you see, as a politician, you may occasionally, just to be nice, to be friendly, you may occasionally treat Sikhism as a separate religion if they insist on that, or if you expect them to insist on that. You may use expressions like Hindus and Sikhs, but in fact, historically speaking, Sikhism is a part of Hinduism. Buddhism is a part of Hinduism. So about that, you have to be very clear. Now, these groups, of course, now share in the anti-Hindu animus of secularism and of Christianity and Islam. How to get them back? Well, one thing, of course, is to inform them properly. But you see, before you can convince them, you will have to get around all the influences, all the hostile influences they have from other sides. So we are in for the long haul. This will take time. But you see, ultimately, this will have to happen. Another thing that you have to convince them about is that, you see, if they are separate from Hinduism, that doesn't really make a difference for the enemies of Hinduism, which is Islam and Christianity, because they want to swallow everyone. Whether you're a Buddhist or a Sikh or a Sanatani or an Arya Samaji or anything, they want to swallow you all. Why do Christian missionaries insist that tribal religions are not Hinduism? You see, depending on how you define Hinduism, they are Hinduism or they are not Hinduism. But at any rate, for Christians, it makes no difference at all. They are not Christians. That is what counts. Whether they are Vedic or something else, they are not Christians. So they have to convert to Christianity. Christian missionaries don't go all the way to Chota Nagpur to tell the Santals and the Mughals, please, you see, keep your own religion, because it's not Vedic. We hate Vedic religion, but we don't hate your religion. No, that's not what they are there for. They are telling the Santals and the Mughals, please convert to Christianity. Just as they go to Varanasi and tell the Vedic Pandits, convert to Christianity. You see, that is the only thing that counts with them. So saying that Sikhism or Buddhism or the tribal religions or what is separate from Hinduism is only a manner of speaking, and strategically it is meant to divide the enemy, so that he is less strong and less able to resist Christianization. So you see, all these people who say that they are against Hinduism, essentially they are in favor of their own enemies. You see, what they are saying against Hinduism comes down to strengthening their enemies. Because the Christians, after all, are not Sikhs. You see, they are Christians, and they want the Sikhs to convert to Christianity. In fact, they're having a lot of success now in Punjab. They're converting quite a few Sikhs. And so, with Hindus, they have a lot less problems. The Sikhs, I mean. With Christians, they are getting converted like anything. So, you know, you should make them aware of this. Now, finally, as for the ISKCON and the Arya Samaj, it is true that they import into Hinduism a lot of, you know, prophetic monotheism. Like the Arya Samaj says that just like the Bible is for Christians or the Quran for Muslims, the Vedas are for Hindus. Now, that is not the stance of the Vedas in Hinduism. The Quran is a revealed scripture. It is in the form of God addressing his prophet, God addressing man. Christianity, well, the Bible is a bit more complex, but essential parts of it are also in that form. Like the Ten Commandments, it is God saying, you see, I am a jealous God, you should have no other gods before me, and these are my commandments. And then he gives the Ten Commandments. So it is God addressing men. By contrast, in the Vedas, you systematically have men addressing gods. You know, it starts, or, you know, the first verse of the Rig Veda is that I worship the fire. You know, or we worship the fire. I mean, it is, we men, we are worshiping a god. And so it has a very different status. And therefore, you see, the Vedas are an important and influential, somewhat normative piece of literature, but ultimately, you see, they are not authoritative. They are not God-given. And those Hindus who say, oh, the Vedas are God-given, the Vedas are revealed scripture, well, they are wrong. And they are not wrong because some Western scholar comes in and gives this as his opinion. The Vedas themselves say it. You see, first of all, they are in the form of we men, we worship the gods. But secondly, it is also said very explicitly at some places, like Vasishta, the seer Vasishta says at some point that it is the seers who, with their singing, with their composition, engender the Vedic hymns. So it is said very explicitly that the Vedas are not revealed scripture. So the Arya Samaj is very wrong on this one. But you see, the Arya Samaj in the 19th century was trying to imitate the dominant ideology of the day. So you see, they had to sort of make Hinduism respectable in the eyes of the missionaries. So they tried to make Hinduism as Christian looking as possible. They recast Hinduism in the mold of Christianity. And you see, in their situation, that may have been understandable. Now, definitely, you see, this is a bypass station. We should now just simply go for the truth. You see, we should have a proper historical view of what Hinduism is, and it is not based on a revealed scripture. Similarly, with the ISKCON, they very when you go into an ISKCON temple, you see it feels very uptight and very much looking like a Christian church. The way, for example, that they concentrate on Krishna and dismiss all other gods, whom they call demigods, is such an artificial thing. You see, in Hinduism, everything that is venerated, everything that is somehow higher than yourself, is treated as a god. It's said so explicitly in the Bhagavad Gita. You see that everything high, everything respectable, everything awe-inspiring can be venerated. If you venerate it, it is the same thing as Krishna himself. You see, ultimately, all divine things participate of the same essence. But it is okay if locally you worship Shakti or Shiva or some other god. And so, you see, this is what the ISKCON does not want to understand. So they have taken some tendencies within Hindu history and then radicalized those in the mold of Christianity. So, you see, they are wrong. And, that has to be explained to them.
So the next question, please.
Hi, this is Kshitij. Dr. Elst, I would like to know you. I think Venkatesh also asked that question in chat. How do we help Muslims to outgrow Islam? And the second part of the question is basically there are certain Muslim reformist people like the first one that comes to mind is Irshad Manji, and she, I think she's a lesbian by origin, and she says that in true for true Islam, you need to go back to it, and it doesn't mean warring with each other and stuff like that. So, how do we help our Muslim friends, so to say, to outgrow Islam and its negative influences? Thank you.
Yes, well, there we really have a problem because many Muslims take their distance from so-called fundamentalism, or what I would rather call real Islam, by making a compromise with the world in general, the modern world specifically, and then pretending that this is real Islam. Like, for instance, you have people who say Muhammad was the first feminist, because they want to please modern public opinion and therefore pretend to be pro-feminism. At the same time, they want to keep on venerating Muhammad. So you see, they combine the two by saying Muhammad was the first feminist. Now, sorry, but this is ridiculous. Similarly, you see, they say that Muhammad would never have tolerated this or that riot that took place, this or that Muslim violence. They would never have tolerated 9/11, for example, or the bomb attack in Mumbai. Well, that's not true, you see. Of course, Muhammad didn't have fire weapons. He didn't have explosives. So he had a more primitive form of warfare. But essentially, of course, he was in favor of laying bombs and so on, whatever it takes to achieve Islamic victory. So, of course, modern terrorism, modern jihad is Islam. In fact, you see, the first mujahid, the first who carried out jihad was Muhammad. No Islamic court would sentence the Islamic terrorists of today, because they would immediately refer to the precedent set by Muhammad. Now, Islamic law is precisely built on Muhammad's precedent. So, you see, you are asking from a Muslim judge to say this behavior, terrorism, is un-Islamic because what Muhammad did was un-Islamic. You see, if you can show that your behavior is based on Muhammad's behavior, then you win in Islamic. Because no Muslim judge can say Muhammad's behavior was un-Islamic. So you see, all these moderate Muslims are neither here nor there. You see, they are trying to unite fire and water, and it just doesn't work. So ultimately, again, you see, first be clear about it among yourselves before you address Muslims. But you see, ultimately, you have to make clear that the choice is very clear. It is either joining the real world, joining modernity, or Islam. There is no halfway between. You see, the problem is that very many Muslims have only a very hazy idea of what Islam is. Just like among Hindus, who mostly have only a very hazy idea of what Hinduism is. And therefore, you see, they have grown up with a certain morality, with certain mores, with certain prayers, and so on. And they think that this is Islam, and that therefore any non-Muslim is not moral and not religious, and so on. Therefore, not being a Muslim must be a very bad thing, and non-Muslims must be very bad people. And so, I mean, it's a primitive way of looking at things, but it's there. So that gradually, that will have to be cured. Now you have this modern education. You have a far better avenue to their minds than existed ever before. Unfortunately, education is in the hands of the enemy. So they don't learn the proper things they should know, that any modern man should know about Islam. You do have, however, an even more direct avenue, namely the internet. You see, every isolated villa in Saudi Arabia nowadays has an internet connection. And so, the truth about Islam for every single Muslim is just a mouse click away. So if you provide the correct information on the internet, that will already make a difference. Of course, the problem then is how to make this information which is available, how do you make it actually reach people? And so about this, you see, I am still thinking, and I'm perfectly open to suggestions. And but I realize it's a problem. You see, to know the truth is one thing, but to get it across is something else.
All right. So I now read out a question from someone who doesn't have access to his mic here. So this is from Mr. Ramakrishnan. So he says, this is regarding the increasing numbers of apathetic urban Hindus who don't seem to have any specific commitment to any Hindu cause or even principle, even in private. How does one rekindle their commitment, they who are otherwise quite successful in their lives?
Yes, that is really a problem. First of all, it may pay not to be committed. You see, when a jihad attack comes, it's not very discerning. So it makes no difference between apathetic Hindus and committed Hindus. So in that sense, of course, being apathetic doesn't save you from anything. But on the other hand, it may mean that, for example, Islam becomes dominant, Islam becomes the ruling religion, and you can save yourself perfectly and easily by converting to Islam. In fact, you see, that is how much of the Islamic population came about. You see, in Egypt, in Syria, and so on, who were originally predominantly Christian, well, and before that they were pagan, but you see, when Islam came about, they were predominantly Christian. Well, gradually, many Christians have dropped Christianity and chosen a more comfortable life as Muslims. So you see, this way, many non-committed Hindus have that option of becoming Muslims or Christians, or whatever the case may be, of just riding with the tide. So in that sense, it's a great advantage to be apathetic. Then you see, there is very little that encourages them to be more committed. During the freedom movement, at least, if you respected yourself, you were for freedom. You were somehow part of the freedom movement to different degrees, but at least you knew on what side you stood. Nowadays, there is not such a cause immediately. So it's easy to be apathetic. What to do about it? Well, what I see around me is that people positively get enthusiastic from meeting enlightened or somehow inspiring Hindu leaders, gurus essentially. I mean, very many Westerners who would never want to be seen with anything Hindu, who think Hinduism is funny and backward and so on, nevertheless are enthusiastic about some guru they have met and follow this guru. And you see, they don't dress Hindu, or they don't look Hindu, they don't do Hindu things except the particular yoga that they've learned from this guru. So you see, this model applies more and more in urban India. And so you see many people who don't care about philosophy and wisdom, nevertheless may encounter at some point someone that positively inspires them. You see, that can also happen. Otherwise, you see, in an organized fashion, because that is probably what you're asking for, in an organized fashion, the first thing you can do is simply to get the proper information through the usual channels, the channels that are now controlled by your enemies. And you don't have to do anything special. I mean, you don't have to do P&O type history, about Rama living 1 million years ago or so. This is all not necessary. You don't have to do very much. But you see, there are certain views that deserve to be altered simply because they're wrong. And you see, to give a more positive account of Hinduism. Like, for example, about the caste system. You see, very many people in India and abroad are against Hinduism because of the caste system. Now, you see, Hindus try to counter this by very weak defenses, saying, you see, caste is not Hindu at all and so on. You see, that's not true. I mean, for at least 2,000 years, caste has been bound up with Hinduism. You can't deny that. But what you can do is go back to the sources and see how caste came about as a social institution that was gradually adopted by the Vedic tradition. Initially, it was not there. You see, when you see Vasishta and Vishwamitra and so on, the first rishis, they had no notion of caste. And when you see nowadays, some Hindu communities, mostly outside India, have completely outgrown caste. I mean, I know the Hindu community in Holland, about more than 100,000 people. They have lived in Suriname for a century, and they have outgrown caste completely. They have no notion of caste. And they are perfect Hindus. They're going to the temple and so on. So this is perfectly possible. But, you have to make that better known. You have to make Hindus understand it, and then you can go out and make outsiders understand.
Yes. All right, the next participant, if you have a question for Dr. Elst.
I have a question here. Is democracy in its Western model what's presently adapted in India? Does it serve the Hindu cause? Is it probably we're better off junking that model and using something much more useful and much more aligned with our cause?
Yes, I think democracy is a very important subject. You see, in my country, in the West, I am working for direct democracy, like you have in Switzerland, through referendums, where people do not so much mandate their representatives, but take their sovereignty whenever they want it, and only mandate politicians for things that don't strongly interest them. In India, that model would certainly not work, or at any rate, it would provoke fear among Hindus, because it would mean, for instance, that if Kashmir holds a referendum on separation from India, it would carry the day. Although the question is, at what level do you organize a referendum? You see, if you organize it on a pan-Indian level, do you want Kashmir to separate from India? Then there will be a majority in favor of keeping Kashmir. That is also true. Anyway, you see, in the case of India, this is rather, a thing that we can dream of, that is at a distance. Okay, what people in India talk about when they discuss democracy is, for example, changing the present Westminster system to a presidential system like you have in America. You see, it would make sense in so far as it would emphasize unity. There is one man, you see, standing for India as a whole. You see, since the division in the different pradeshes is already strong, at a parliamentary level, you should have a counterweight to that to represent unity, and that would be the president. A strong president. And, I admit that makes sense. But if you mean a completely different system that has nothing to do with democracy, I don't know. You see, most people who say that either don't know what the alternative would be, or, you see, they think of some pre-modern feudal system where an elite would rule and the rest, would not be asked their opinion, and typically always assuming that they themselves would be part of that elite. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I don't think of myself as being naturally part of the elite that would come to power in a non-democratic system. And since I don't like to be ruled by others, I do prefer democracy. And I mean, in the Indian case and in the case of the Hindus in India, democracy should serve them well, since they are the majority. I mean, what are you complaining about? You see, if they finally institute democracy in Pakistan, it would make very little difference for the Hindu majority, because the Hindu minority there. Because you see, they are powerless in any case, whether there is a dictator or there's a genuine democracy. So they will still be persecuted and so on. Democracy cannot help that. But in the case of India, Hindus are the majority, therefore they can change the laws as they will. They can perfectly arrange things so that their interests are best served. If nowadays they are complaining, it means they are not mobilizing. It means they are not using the power they have within the present system. And indeed, I think that is the case. You see, they are complaining a lot and not using what force they have.
All right. So thanks, Dr. Elst. I have another question I need to ask on behalf of one second. On behalf of Priya. So her question is, with others turning monotheist, how long can Hindus exist as decentralized or disparate groups? Do you, Dr. Elst, do you foresee Hindus turning monotheist, not just in the sense of converting to Christianity and Islam?
No, I don't think that the explicitly monotheistic schools within Hinduism, like the Arya Samaj, are gaining any ground. I don't think that informally their influence is growing. I mean, there used to be an informal influence, particularly of the Brahmo Samaj, which was a reform movement in 19th century Bengal, and which had some influence among Anglicized intellectuals, trying to do away with all the superstitious or backward parts of Hinduism, concentrating on the philosophy of the Upanishads, and then trying to make that look as much as possible as Christianity by declaring Hinduism essentially monotheistic. Now so that kind of tendency is not particularly gaining ground and not losing ground, but I don't see that as an important trend. You see, you do have the view that monotheism is somehow superior, that idolatry and polytheism are somehow backward. That has been instilled into you by the missionaries especially, and that idea lingers much among Hindus. Again, you see, I mean, I don't have my finger on the pulse of Indian public opinion enough, but I, at least, for what I can say, I don't have the impression that it is particularly growing. Nevertheless, I do see the non-Hindu tendency growing. I do see Islam growing in particular. I also see Christianity growing. Doesn't have a very high birth rate, but it makes many conversions. So I see monotheism growing in that sense. As for Hinduism itself, well, what is to be done is to finally properly research these concepts of monotheism, polytheism, and inform Hindus better about what their religion used to be about. Because again, you see, they have a very twisted view of Hinduism. Hindus themselves, I mean. In particular, what I want to say about this subject, monotheism, polytheism, is what Ram Swarup taught me. Namely, monotheism or polytheism is about how many gods. So is there one? Are there many? And Hinduism doesn't think in those terms. You see, the divine is a sphere up there, and it can be conceived as one, or it can be conceived as many. And Hindus don't make a problem of that. You see, the problem monotheism has been introduced in India by the monotheists. Hindus themselves didn't have that problem. And Hinduism is not monotheist or polytheist and doesn't care. And you see, that I think is the proper attitude, and that should be emphasized. That, of course, Hindus should better realize.
All right. Thank you for your response, Dr. Elst. Anybody else wants to has a question for Dr. Elst? We just have about 10 more minutes to go.
I think you can ask Varun's question. It was about Priya.
Okay. All right. So this question is from Varun. So he says there was a tweet by Dr. Elst a while back, which basically said that 25 years ago, the first article critical of Islam in a communist weekly Toastanden. I'm not sure I got it right. Yeah. So back then, leftist meant anti-religion and therefore also anti-Islam. Why and how does Dr. Elst think the change happened? Is this specific to India or is it the case worldwide?
Well, it is definitely a problem worldwide. You see, what I referred to was my own first article about Islam in the Flemish Communist Weekly Toestanden. And at that time, criticism of Islam for the left implied also criticism of Islam. But in the early 90s, a shift happened, partly because of a shift that also happened in the right. We see the European right was not so much against Islam. You see, back in the time of the Nazis, you see, they were all in favor of Islam. And therefore, you see quite a few rightist activists, they were still against Jews, just like in the Second World War, and therefore all the more in favor of Islam. Now, you see, that tendency still exists, but very, very marginally. And as newer people, a newer generation came to fill the ranks of the right, it was more conscious of the Islam problem. And more it saw Israel as an ally. And so that shift took place on the right, and therefore the left, being anti-right, made the opposite shift. And you see, in Europe, Muslims tend to be immigrants, working class, and so on. I mean, underneath, or on the lower rungs of the ladder, and therefore the left felt more and more inclined to side with them. Today, socialist and also green parties, to the extent that they define themselves as leftist, have quite a few Muslims among their voters, and therefore are more and more in favor of Islam. Like, for example, on the headscarf problem, they were against the headscarf until very recently. Now you see, because Muslims are more and more wearing the headscarf and constitute a larger and larger part of their voters, they are for the headscarf. So you see, this problem is there since about 20 years and is getting worse and worse and worse. And in that sense, Europe is like India. You see, when I wrote my first article, it was from a position of, let's say, moral superiority. I thought, that in my country this could never happen. In fact, you see, only 5 years later, already it was more or less like in India.
Okay, so one more question on behalf of Amar, who had to leave the thing because there's some work. So he says, what does the good doctor have to say about the state of Indology in India and in the West?
Yeah, well, it's essentially similar.
Mm-hmm.
Classical Indology, focusing on Sanskrit and Sanskrit literature,
Mm-hmm.
is slumbering, is in decline.
Mm-hmm.
Many Indology chairs in the West are being closed down. And it's analogous to India, because Sanskrit studies also are suffering in India. And so the emphasis is now more on, let's say, sociology of South Asia. And you see, that is valid. Somebody should do that. It's not so much my concern.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think Dr. Elst, I think there's a problem with your connection. Dr. Elst, can you please log out and rejoin? Just froze for some reason. You guys need to hang on for a while, if that's okay with you.
Sure, no problem.
We should be joining in a bit, and you guys can talk with each other, introduce yourselves or whatever. Go on, this is not like a silent room. Go. Unmute your
I think
connections and
everybody's mic is muted. Yeah, okay.
unmute your connections, your mics, and then let there be some noise.
Sandeep, sorry, let me go first. This is with reference to Dr. L's decolonizing the Hindu mind, and it's been out of print for long. So, does any one of you have any status like what's happening with it? And
no, I don't believe it is out of print. It's still available. You can order it from Voice of India.
No, basically, I just ordered that the notion of Hindu fascism and decolonizing the Hindu mind was not available. So
maybe it's reprint. As far as I know, it's available.
Okay, sure, I'll check it.
Okay.
Hey, Sandeep, this is Kalpesh here. Somebody talked about democracy, whether it's suitable for India or not. But from a historical perspective, which all political system which we have tried in our history is something which basically can you suggest a reference, or can Dr. Els suggest a reference which we should study, so that we can study different types of political system which we have tried in our history.
Uh, there has been there's this wonderful book by
KP Jaiswal.
KP Jaiswal. It's called Hindu Polity. That basically talks about the republican states or ganas within ancient India. You could look at that. But that apart, throughout we've pretty much been monarchies, the kingly form of government. A lot of echo here. Make some noise. Why is it so silent?
Good idea if each one of us can introduce ourselves,
Yeah,
as in
precisely.
what they are doing in this subject, and not maybe not in the professional life, but in this field in which we are interested in,
In
how
professional
they are
life also.
contributing or what they are reading. Yeah, professionally if they want. So
Yeah.
so that. So, okay, because I started a topic, I'll introduce myself. I'm Rahul Narayan. I'm currently in Germany. I have a startup that's about my professionalism right as of now. About Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma, I'm right now reading books and trying to assimilate as much knowledge as possible. Because when I came out of India, that's when I realized that there is a huge gap between what I perceived in India and what's happening outside. So that's when I thought that it's good idea to read books and blogs and try to find out more about what I am and who I am. So that's what I'm doing right now. So somebody else can take up and start talking about. And if they have some books or something like that they are reading or something they are doing, they can talk about it as well. That would be a good idea.
All right. Anybody who wants to go next?
So hi, I'm Sujata Srinath. I'm professionally I'm a technical writer. So and I just want to share. There are this idea that Hinduism is on the wane and stuff like. I'm not so sure. There are a lot of people who are writing small magazines from these called mathas. They publish a lot of English magazines, small ones that come out every week or every fortnightly, and they have a lot of good articles, and we get a lot at home, and I do read from them, and very insightful. Probably those should be kind of distributed to everybody. And these are the best way to disseminate, I would say, is put it in story form. We don't need any pundits, really. We need just to have the essence in the majority, because then it will work in democracy. We need pundits, but we need them to bring it down to the harikatha level, where you tell masses of people that this is what being a Hindu is, and this is how we are. These are not the rituals, not anything. This is your essence. That would make a lot of sense, I think. And that's what I wanted to share. I don't know.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Kalpesh, and I do write on economics and financial matters with on from the Indian right perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely from the religious perspective, I haven't written yet. But yeah, I mean, as a part of the normal upbringing, yeah, I have learned about the way typically a Hindu household will learn about our way of life. From one more question, probably Sandeep, I'm going to ask you is the way our the temple money is being used by government. See, we have a lot of temples and mutts and trusts. They have a lot of money, but all this money has been controlled by the government. Of course, we all know that. But then these money has never been used for any of the research which can go for Vedic research or any research which can basically counter to the leftist or Marxist propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
So shouldn't we also try to I mean, think over it, that how best a temple fund should be utilized to propagate the Vedic philosophy and the research in these areas.
Well, I mean, to answer that, let's see. So first thing is they need to be informed. Not all mutts are, so to say, guilty of what you're saying. There are some mutts and temples who are investing their money, pumping their money into this, what you call, research into Indology, etc. And there are other mutts which focus on traditional scholarship in, say, Sanskrit or their local regional languages. So that's
Mhm,
generally the broad picture so far.
mhm,
But yes, there exists a gap between uh, how to put this, between, like, for instance, there are some mutts which invest their funds only in a traditional scholarship, but they are not aware of how their own dharma is being attacked by, let's say, in English. They're
mhm,
not even aware of that. So
mhm,
there's a genuine gap there which needs to be filled.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
I hope that answers you.
Yeah, that definitely answers me. But my only concern was that, see, basically
Hmm.
that message to
Hmm.
all the people who are heading this trust or heading this temple,
Hmm.
that is something has not went across, as you rightly said. That has not went across, that people. I mean, basically, the media has been controlled by the Marxists. The education system has been controlled by the Marxists, and at the same time,
Hmm.
we haven't
Hmm.
done anything much to counter them, and having so much of resources with us, and we are still not using it. I mean, if you look at it, the fiscal financial strength which a temple put together can have,
Hmm.
and they can virtually make any kind of decisions and impact any kind of decisions which India as a nation can or should have.
Hmm. Well, it's an unfortunate fact that, and the reality that it's not happening. So,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, we
I
need
mean,
to
I'm
kind of
just
educate
sharing
them.
my.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, definitely, that's I'm just sharing.
right. So, I guess we'll need to end this here. If you have any feedback to share or something, you can write to info@indiafacts.co.in. So I'll just
Yeah.
send a group chat where you can send the feedback.
Okay, excellent. Thanks Sandeep, for organizing this.
You're welcome. Thank you again,
Thanks.
and hope to see you in future events like this.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I guess we need to do more of such stuff. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks all.
you're welcome.
Thanks and bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.